I have a priest friend that when I was a senior in the high school seminary, he was a freshman. We've been friends for 50 years. And he has had for, well, most of his priesthood, a dumb phone. Yes, a dumb one. He has one of those flip phones and can't do anything with it. And he thought that was sufficient. The diocese gave him an i6 phone as this program they have, and he wouldn't use it. I said, why would you use a dumb phone when you can have a smartphone? It died Friday. It died. It wouldn't work anymore, so he had to use his i6 phone. And he's putting in the contacts and all that stuff in the phone, and he discovered, because he really didn't know much about them, that you could open it with a thumbprint. He didn't do it right yet, but he knows he can do that with a thumbprint. And of course, all of us know now the newest phones, I don't have this one, but you can do it with a face print or whatever they call that, face recognition. It's all about identity and identification. Now, this thumb thing scares him, but I use it all the time, and it's very convenient. And yet it raises the question, can your identity be stolen? They say yes. People can get in, they get your Social Security, and there's risks. Because identity and identification is a very important thing for our inner life, our outer life, for everything, the way we communicate. How do people know us? Who are we? Who are we as individuals? Who are we in our culture? Who is our culture? Who is our church? Who is our worldwide church? Who is our nation? There's all these levels of identification and identity, and it goes to who we are. So it's no surprise that the Scripture is loaded with this too. Not only back to the time of Jesus or to Isaiah, but all the way back to Abraham. We know who Abraham is because of how he was identified. In fact, God changed his identity from Abram to Abraham. And the world knew him differently after he had had his covenant relationship formed with God. So we go back to Isaiah in the first reading today, and he brings up identity in a special way. He's talking about the identity of prophet and of Israel, that part of their identity was that they would have to suffer and struggle and be faithful to God. That's what it was about. Their identity was that even in their struggle and in their suffering and their rejection, that in that, they would come to know who they are in relationship to their God. In the responsorial psalm, and the psalms are all about identity with God, there's this beautiful line. The first line, in fact, said that on the day I called out to the Lord, He inclined His ear to me. There's other places where it says, on the day I called out to the Lord, He answered me. But I prefer this one. He inclined His ear. So we say, Lord, Lord, help me, save me, love me, show me. And He just leans over with His ear. Yeah, what do you want? Huh? Speak to me. Come on, tell me. It's a rich image. But that's part of our identity, a belief that when we call out to our God, it's not a God who's silent, who turns away from us, but inclines His ear so that He can listen to all of our nonsense. That's who we are with our God. But then we shift in the second reading, and the identity comes in another way. James is writing to the community that he has helped formed. He's writing this letter because they're not so good in their identity with God in these days. They've drifted away. And this is how they've done it. They've shifted their faith up into the head. They know their faith, but they don't necessarily live it in works and actions. So he says to them, what good, really, what good is it to say all this stuff that you believe if you don't put it in action? So, for example, he says, you pass by this woman, she's barefoot and doesn't have clothes, and she's starving and hungry, and you see her in her condition and say, oh, good morning, keep warm and well fed, and then you walk away. He says, no. You see her and you say, oh, here, let me give you my cloak, and are you hungry? Let me feed you. So he says, show me your faith up here and no actions or works, and I'll show you my faith, the actions and works that come from what I believe. That's the identity we should have. We should be transformed by what we believe, and it should show in our actions. So here's the big context, and then right in there sits the gospel today. And it's a fun one. It's in all the evangelists, And in the other ones, it's more developed. But Mark is right to the point. And he's walking along on his way to Caesarea Philippi with his apostles. And on the way, he asks a couple questions. And these kind of like cheesemate questions. Who do people say that I am? What are they saying out there? Huh? Come on. Who do people say I am? So his apostles say, one says, well, some say John the Baptist. Another one pipes up, or Elijah, or one of the prophets. And then he turns on him. But who do you say that I am? And Peter speaks up, you are the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one. You are the Christ. Now, the other evangelists go into this whole thing about no mere man has taught this to you, but blah, blah, blah. But Mark just goes on. So then he begins to unveil and reveal to them what and who his identity is because he is the Christ. He says, I am going to have to suffer at the hands of the scribes and Pharisees and be put to death and then be raised up. That's who I am. That's what I have to do. That's what I have to be. And it says that Peter rebuked him, pulled him aside like, oh, stop that talk. And Jesus turned and rebuked him, and he said the most awful words that are ever said to Peter in the Scriptures. Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, you devil. You're thinking like man, not like God. And then he goes further to really develop what this means, because it isn't just about who he is, but who we will be because of our faith in him. And he says, unless you take up your cross daily and follow me, you can't have life. That's your identity. You have to lose your life in order to find it. You have to give it away to discover it. I'm reading or rereading a book on forgiveness. It's really, really nice. And there were 2 chapters and 2 stories that really caught my eye because they go to this question of identity. Who are we and who do we become when we look at and listen to and follow Jesus? Especially if we go all the way to the cross with him. Because the cross is the defining story. When we listen to his words, Father, forgive them all, they know not what they do. When we take that in, it has to transform us. So there's this great story is told of this Chinese person who owned their rice paddy, and every day this person would raise up the little wood slat that would let the irrigation waters come in and irrigate his rice paddy. Next door to him was a communist, and he would raise up his wood slat after this one went to sleep and rob him of all his water. Close it, and then he would be irrigated by the water that was supposed to irrigate this farm. And the Christian was a little disturbed by this, even a little more than just disturbed. And he didn't confront him, but he went on day after day, and he was really bothered. So he turned to God in prayer and said, what do I do with this? What am I supposed to do? And the light went on. So he would let the irrigation waters into his paddy field, and after it was there a bit, lift up the wood of the communist and let his water flow into his field, close it, and then again water irrigate his field. And it was through this generosity that he said, I'm not going to confront him and fight him. I'm just going to be generous. Lose my life in order to find it. And the story said, I don't know if it's true, if it's just a story, that the communist was converted to Christianity. Because the good works, the love that he showed actually had power in his life. There's another story about Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela, as I'm sure you know, was the first black African president of South Africa. And the black Africans it was their land. It was their land until, I think, just after the Second World War. And a lot of Europeans, wealthy Europeans, left because of the whole Holocaust and all, and they went to all kinds of places, South America, and they went to Africa too. And what they tended to do, the white Europeans, was they had a lot of money, and therefore they had a lot of power at their hands. They took over and became the ruling government. And that was so in South Africa. But they also subjugated the blacks, at least in South Africa, I'm sure other places too. And eventually they developed these apartheid laws. I remember this as a kid. And the apartheid law was a double system of law. So the whites in that country could walk on the sidewalks, but the blacks and people of color had to walk on the street. They weren't worthy to walk on the sidewalks. Well, the rest of the world reacted terribly to this. Mexico, the United States, many nations, they refused to trade with South Africa for years, and they said, until you change those apartheid laws, we're not trading with you. This is a barricade, a trade war. We're not doing anything with you until you change those apartheid laws. This went on for years. Well, meanwhile, a lot of blacks were jailed because many of them turned to violence, pistols and rocks and whatever. But Nelson Mandela, to my knowledge, never did. He just used his mouth. He spoke up. He was very intelligent, very spiritual man. And he said, we are equal in God's eyes. Nobody can make a law that makes one higher and one lower. And the ruling class there were more bothered by him than they were by the stones and the pistols. Those were easy to take care of. But this mouth of his incited people to believe differently than what the government wanted them to believe. So they put him in jail for 27 years. Now, I don't remember when he went in, but I do remember when he came out. He was still quite young. And when he came out, it was one of those typical scenes, standing there. You remember those scenes with all the different microphones for all the radios and televisions, and the cameras were there. And someone said to him, the first question, it's the typical dumb question that gets asked, how do you feel today? So he said, how do I feel? He was not black. He was black, with these white teeth. And he says, well, I feel wonderful, smiling. He says, I get to go home for the first time in 27 years, sleep in my own bed with my wife in my home. Yeah, I'm very, very happy. And then the next person says, are you going to sue the government? And he really looked perplexed. He said, do what? Sue the government. I said, well, why would I do that? And he said, they put you in jail for 27 years in isolation a lot of the time. You must want to sue the government. And he said, listen, 27 years ago, this government put my body in jail. Do you think I'd let them put my soul there too? I forgave my government 27 years ago, and all these years, I've lived in peace. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. This was a man who had been transformed spiritually by the cross of Christ. He knew what it was, and he was able to forgive. Well, I knew that story. I saw it, I remember it. But I read one in this book that went further, because later he got elected as the first black president of South Africa. And there was a story of a woman who the white officials had come and dragged off her son and burned him alive. And then a couple of years later, did the same to her husband. Well, lit him on fire right there. She witnessed it. And after he became president, he decided that they would give forgiveness to any white official who had done atrocities. They wouldn't jail them. They would forgive them if they came and admitted what they had done wrong and expressed repentance. They had to get up and publicly say what they had done wrong, and anyone who wanted to respond to them could. So the official who had killed both her son and her husband came in the court and admitted what he had done. And she said she forgave him. And of course the court did. But she went further, because as she was invited to speak, she said, you know, with all the pain I've suffered, I still have a lot of love to give. And I accept your words on condition that you will come to my house twice a month and let me be your mother. He fainted. He fainted. That was like overwhelming. How could someone love like that? How could someone have that kind of forgiveness? But you see, when you're transformed, it's amazing what you might be able to do. And this woman, like Nelson Mandela himself, chose not to live with hatred and bitterness, which would be natural and normal. Most would, I think. Perhaps I would. But she believed deeply in the power of forgiveness, the power of love. So today, in this gospel, Jesus is curious. Who do people say that I am? Do they get it? Who am I? Oh, you're John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. So he says to them more directly, who do you say that I am? And Peter gets it. He says, you're the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One. We know who you are. But did he? Maybe he had knowledge up here. But Jesus begins to reveal it. I have to suffer, die, and then be raised up. No, we can't do that. Yes, I can, and I have to. And it was at that moment that he revealed their identity. You too must suffer and die and be raised up. That's who you will become. That's who you must become if you truly want to follow me.